The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to Faith Matters for another week here on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, along with Reverend Carl Zarowski, the senior pastor at St. Peter's United Methodist Church in Morehead City. And also we have Dr. Bob Wilson, the author of Nullifying God. And good day, gentlemen. Good to have you back.
Hey, good morning, Bill.
Actually, take two on this one, but
good
that's
to be
okay.
back.
That's okay. All right, let's talk about our first article here because it does involve a faith conundrum. There's so many things about this article and this story that give us pause and help us to think about where is our faith and how strong are our convictions about our own faith, because in the object of this story, certainly the strength is there. Judge Tales, this is from the Colorado Independent, Judge jails defense investigator after she refuses to testify in death penalty case, citing her religious beliefs. A prominent criminal defense investigator in Colorado is in jail for refusing to testify in a capital case that she says is in conflict with her religious beliefs. The Greta Lindenkrantz, 67, and a devout Mennonite, has been subpoenaed by the 18th Judicial District Attorney George Browsher, I'm not sure how you say that, Browcher, his office to testify in the appeal of her former client, Robert Ray. Robert Ray and a co-defendant were sentenced to death for a killing in 2005. His appeal, though, is that he was not given an adequate defense. So in order to prosecutors have called the defense attorney for her to state that her appeal or her defense indeed was adequate, thereby ensuring his conviction and his trial and his death penalty. Lindenkrantz, again, a devout Mennonite, is a highly respected veteran investigator, worked on several death penalty cases in defense of detainees at Guantanamo Bay even. Will help them prove that Ray had competent legal defense if she testifies. But she's facing both a subpoena by the prosecutors and an explicit order from the judge to testify about her work. And this is now me telling you directly. It's a quote from the judge. And I'm ordering you to answer the questions. I don't want to do this, Mrs. Lindenkrantz. All I want to hear is the truth. But I have no problem, she says, I have no problem saying the truth if death was not on the line. What a terrible conundrum to be in. Bob, I think you had stated that this just brings to mind so much of what we have read about in the Bible from our apostles.
Well, it really does. And I think that I admire Lindenkrantz, first of all, very, very much, because she's going against the flow, going against the state. But I think one of her statements is that she is resolute in her conviction that testifying on behalf of prosecutors could lead to what she considers state-sanctioned murder. And that's a quote from her. And that goes back to what Peter said when he was called by the Pharisees to not preach the risen Lord Jesus Christ. And he answered them, and I love this answer. And in today's climate, where the state says, thou shalt do, and we say, no, we shall not, he says, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. And then he goes on, 2 chapters later, he says, Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men. And that is not an acceptable answer in today's climate here in this country, because God is not anywhere to be seen. But that is exactly what Linda Krantz is doing. And it's like, go for it, girl. But at the same time, she is going to pay a penalty.
And she is paying it. She's in jail now.
Yep.
And Carl, I think that this is painful. And it really has nothing to do with how any of us may feel about the death penalty and its legitimacy or not. This is really about how a person who has a faith and believes that under our American system they ought to be able to practice that faith.
That's correct. That's correct. And I had mentioned earlier that one of the things that fascinates me about this article is the witness of this woman.
Yes.
Look at the example that she is setting for others. Okay. And, Jesus did tell the disciples that you will be persecuted for my sake. And we're seeing this happen right here in this courtroom. And God is being talked about in this courtroom more than just in the swearing-in ceremony. And can you imagine what the judge is going through here as well, because this has got to be difficult for him. We don't know anything about his faith, but his job is to, make sure that things are happening according to the law. And he's doing his job. And I love it where he says, I hate to do this,
right,
but I need to force you to answer this question.
We think about Paul standing before the Pharisees of the Sanhedrin, and they're just pummeling him with these questions and things like that. Well, here in this courtroom, the ADA, the Assistant District Attorney, we would call him in North Carolina, asked Linda Krantz more than 70 questions about her work. And each time she says, I cannot answer your question.
I think the thing that in those answers, what I hear is, I cannot answer that question. What I'm surprised at is that she didn't say, I will not.
Right.
Yeah, what a big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a difference there. In other words, this is my choice to not answer these questions. She certainly could have answered the questions, but I think what she was saying is, according to who I am and what I know about
the
God,
essence of me.
Right.
Cannot do this.
I cannot do this, but at the same time, I will not do this. I think that it's interesting here. There's a statement, I assume. I think could be the judge we're talking about. The judge says it's probably unfair for the court to have to vie with God. That to me is very, very interesting. I mean, here the judge is saying, hey, we're conflicting with God, and it's unfair that we have to do that. Well, then don't do it.
The judge also says that the article says that the judge was clearly moved by Linda Krantz's pleas not to be sent to jail, but she says, the judge, I'm saying here now, says that a full and fair proceeding for both sides is necessary here. Her testimony is necessary for that. And that makes a very difficult position to be in. Go on about this young defense attorney anyway. Linda Krantz has been the primary breadwinner since her husband suffered serious heart problems in 2012. She said her family lives paycheck to paycheck, and after having spent their savings caring for her elderly parents, and it would be extraordinary financial and personal hardship to be put in jail. That one of the things they were considering was whether or not she would go under house arrest and with an ankle bracelet. But her own attorney said it wouldn't matter. She still wouldn't answer, no matter where it was that she was. And her attorney has appealed this decision for this, and that appeal may come about. But the prosecutors and her attorney argues that the prosecutors are able to glean all they need to know about the quality of Ray's legal defense from earlier testimony by Ray's former lawyers under who Linda Krantz worked on in the case from 2005 to 2009. So now you get to the point, is the prosecution making a case for, we are the state, and we're going to tell you what you have to do.
That certainly would be what it would seem to say, and if it does that, then it sets a precedent and not a good one. There's too many things like that. If the state can tell you, thou shalt do, thou shalt not reject us, that's terrible. And of course, that conflicts directly with the language of the First Amendment regarding the free exercise of religion. And that phrase seems somehow to have been lost, the free exercise of religion, and it would apply directly here in my book.
The ADA says that that since she was paid by the state for her work on Ray's behalf, she's obliged to testify. Her attorney disagreed. It's not any justification that someone can be compelled by the state into direct contradiction of her religious beliefs. Constitutional rights are not bought and sold in that matter.
That's messy. I was a former state employee, and you do work for the state. They're paying you while you do it. Well, the work that you did, it belongs to them, and that just adds a whole nother wrinkle to this case. Now, one thing I noted in this article is I can see somebody in her position trying to make a point, trying to buck the system. And she's not doing that here. She says, I'm sorry that I'm upset about this. I'm not a woman raising her fist in the air. I'm not that person. I just try to promote life. And she said, I imagine if I testify, I'm not going to look in the mirror tomorrow and see the person that I am.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Dr. Bob Wilson, and also Reverend Carl Zarowski. And our next article we're going to take up, hopefully we don't get too much in the legal weeds here, but this is from the Detroit Free Press. The headline is Catholics ACLU push back as Michigan bills to protect children from sex assault advance. As you said, Carl, during the break, is that how often are they on the same side, right? Let's see what is this all about. A Senate panel unanimously passed a package of 10 bills Tuesday geared toward protecting children from sexual assault, but the vote belied some concerns about the bills from both the Michigan Catholic Conference and the American Civil Liberties Union. Included in the bills is an extension of the statute of limitations for both civil and criminal cases of sexual assault against children to 30 years beyond the person's 18th birthday. And the sticking point for the two groups is that the bill makes that extension retroactive for civil cases back to 1993. This is not unusual for states to have long periods of where prosecution or civil cases can be brought in sexual assault cases. I think some states, I'm not sure about North Carolina, but I think some states there is no end to that time period. But this is a case where this was, there are a lot of cases, and the Catholic Church is concerned because a lot of their cases involving sexual abuse by priests have been adjudicated. They've been one way or another, or they've been settled. The lawsuits have been settled, but now they could go back and retry on additional civil grounds, going back further than the original case. So it gets messy, or maybe even criminal prosecution here now. Is this troubling at all?
It is. There was a quote in here that I struggled with a little bit. An attorney with the ACLU of Michigan stated, "This makes illegal an act which was legal when it was committed." And I think what they're talking about here is, any sexual assault is a horrible crime, period. And it could be that some things are classified as sexual assault now that were not legally classified that way in 1994. And somebody did something in 94 which was perfectly legal then, but is not now. And that perhaps this bill allows you to go back and prosecute them for that act based on today's law. That's the only thing I can figure from that statement right there.
The only thing I can think of that may fall into that vein has been sometimes the statutory rape provisions have changed about how many years apart from the victim to the perpetrator, how many years difference,
Sure.
and some of that has changed over the years. So that may may be one of those areas that would fall under. That's all I can think of.
It's an interesting thing, and it gets really down into some, like you said, Ben,
Weeds.
legal stuff. But it also, again, has the power to set a precedent, which may not be a good precedent, of saying, okay, we're going to make this act illegal today, and that means that we can go back whatever period of time we choose and make it illegal back then. And somebody who's living, for whatever reason, they didn't get charged back then, all of a sudden that person could be charged today. There's something wrong about that. I'm not saying that we excuse the act that they did, but a formal charge is a very different thing. So we're making this retroactive aspect of it certainly is not a good thing, I don't believe.
Well, you think about the pressure on the prosecution to try and prove something that happened 30 years ago. That is tough.
Exactly.
It's tough to do. But you know how this came about. This came about from the Larry Nassar case.
Right.
The sexual assault case of the way that he abused people under his care as a so-called doctor at various sports venues, and including in Michigan State. So this is out of Michigan is where this is taking place. That's the genesis of this.
Right, because one of these packages, one of these bills, talks about changing some of the rules about who has to report sexual assault, and that now the mandate to report sexual abuse is going to include coaches and athletic trainers, and increase the penalties to $1,000 and 2 years in prison for failing to report cases. Okay, that right there points right to what you're talking about, Ben, because all of this happened involving a gymnastics coach. And now this is the reaction to that incident. Now, I think that the crime that we're talking about here, any sexual abuse crime against anybody, whether they are a minor, whether they are a middle-aged adult, older adult, a legal adult, whether it's a student, whether it is a spouse, any type of sexual abuse or sexual assault is just wrong.
Yeah,
and it's an abuse of power.
Right.
It's an abuse of power.
But the problem there is that sexual abuse, although it's more found today, it's more publicized today, has been a problem forever.
Oh,
Yes, it has been.
It has been. That doesn't make it right, of course.
No.
The question is, how do you agitate that? How do you go after it? How do you work it out to make the people who have been involved in this have to own up and pay for their problems? But it also points out the human condition. That Jesus was very, very clear in the end of the Gospel of Mark, the human heart. And then he goes on from there and lists a whole number of things. So today, it seems like the human heart feels more free to do whatever it wants to do. And how, in my mind, I just cannot put two things together where you were an adult, you were a responsible adult for a group of kids or a number of people under your care, and you abuse that. That just, I can't tell you what that makes me feel like. That is just the wrongest thing. But it seems to be more prevalent today than it has been. So maybe this bill does have some merit in going back. I don't know.
Yeah, the difficulty is, just talking about our legal system and what the burden it puts on it now, is that if you have cases that have been adjudicated, they have cases that have been settled, or maybe there's been a lawsuit and it's been withdrawn because it's been settled one way or another. That's where the Catholic Church is concerned here, because they have paid out settlements out here now, and now is a prosecutor now going to, under this law, is that going to be open to come back and and go and prosecute them both criminally and for the victims to add on additional civil penalties on top of what's already been adjudicated. Now, nobody can blame that victim for saying, yes, we should be able to pile on as much as we can. But you have to look at where is that going to leave us as far as the legal system goes about some things. Again, it may be a gray area, a few things that were legal then would be illegal now. Going back and looking at what other precedent does this take for fraud cases? Does this make now illegal? Would you be able to go back and sue for fraud under something that was not fraud at the time? Any number of ways that becomes tough. However, this is completely separate. The Larry Nassar case is completely separate from the other prevalent thing going on in our society now, where accusations are criminal indictments and do lead to people losing their jobs and careers without a criminal or a civil prosecution. We have to separate that because people are going to have that in their minds. This is completely different. This is about what those courageous victims in the Larry Nassar case did. They came forward and they testified, and he was prosecuted for that. But now, does it need more, or there need to be more weapons in the quiver or more arrows in the quiver for prosecution? It's tough to decide. Like you, Dr. Bob, I said maybe they're right about this. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It almost seems, though, as though we're putting the cart before the horse in this particular case. That how is it that the people involved, how did they even come to the fact that they would abrogate their responsibility, abrogate their morality to cause this kind of thing in the first place? And nobody's looking at that. It seems as though, okay, let's pass a law and that will take care of everything. But that doesn't answer the core problem.
Right.
And that is something that we are woefully deficient or actually turn away from in looking at that today. And that would be, as we said before, the presence of God in our society. It certainly didn't stop Catholic priests years ago from abusing kids. The thing about that would be that priest would then go to his bishop and would confess and repent and then go on from there. But the fact, A, that he did it, and B, that he probably did it again, that's inexcusable. But then it goes back to the point we raised before. How do we stop that kind of thing from happening? What is the condition of the human being that turns us to totally block out whatever God has said?
And we mentioned Catholicism, and that's only because it's in this story, but it's true across any denomination. Anytime a person in a position of power, especially in a religious institution, is then abuses that power with a sexual advance or other kinds of acts against their charges, that's an abuse, and it's not tolerated. This is Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and we'll have more on other subjects coming up in a moment. Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thanks for joining us here. And I am Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, Dr. Bob Wilson, author of Nullifying God, and also Reverend Carl Zarowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church. And on this segment, guys, let's talk about this one here. It's interesting from the various research studies that we've done before. This one is one we are familiar with, Pew Research Council. And this is a story in PJ Media. It says evangelicals hold strong opposing legal abortion, but some are wavering. A Pew Research Center survey shows that while most evangelicals oppose legal abortion in high numbers, some have edged close to the national figure of 57% in their support. Members of the Presbyterian Church in America are the highest-ranked evangelicals in support of legal abortion at 54%, followed by those in the Lutheran Church Mission Missouri Synod, 46%, Seventh-day Adventists at 42%. All other evangelicals are 40%, are below 40% in their support of abortion. And it lists a few there, too. It's interesting whenever we see these surveys. Of course, you always wish you know, and you could go if you want to dig into it. You can find out the survey questions and how they ask the question, et cetera. Because as a research scientist, Bob, you know that's the devil is in those questions as details, well as the details.
Well, in going through here, I was looking at this and I'm saying, what exactly did they ask?
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. Is it legal? Well, the fact of the matter is that abortion is legal in this country following Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the issue. The issue is it moral? And I think one of the things that comes through here, for example, and we talked about this earlier before we went on air, the Presbyterian Church of America's stance opposes abortion, stating that it is the intentional, that's a key word, intentional killing of an unborn child between conception and birth. If that were posited to me, is abortion legal?
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I'd say, yeah, it has to be legal because it's been legalized. But on the other hand, if we're dealing with an immoral issue, that's a whole different thing. And one of the things I brought along today is a statement that I'd like to put in here by Dr. Martin Luther King. In 1963, he was jailed in the Birmingham jail, and he wrote a famous letter.
Yeah.
And a part of that letter, he was asked, on what basis could King, a Christian minister, directly justify flouting an order issued by an Alabama court? He said, the only justification for this nation's laws was God's law. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others, wrote King. The answer lies in the fact there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One not only has a legal but a moral responsibility. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. So abortion being legal, yes, it is legal. Is that law a just law or an unjust law? And I think that is the thing that has to be brought up. People are saying, should it be kept legal? Well, that has to come up before the courts. But the fact that a denomination may say, yeah, it's okay for a woman to have an abortion, is that what they were talking about? If they're just asking the straightforward, almost simplistic question, is it legal? Well, yeah, it is legal. Should it be legal? No. And I'm not going to get into the real delicate situation of what happens if you have to save the life of a mother. What do you do? And the answer is, I don't know. But as far as being legal, no, it should not be legal.
No, this survey question, again, it's interesting in their classification of evangelicals, and it assumes that everyone who attends a Presbyterian church, or PCA anyway, and everyone who attends the Lutheran Church or Churches of Christ, Southern Baptist Convention, Church of the Nazarene, Assemblies of God, or Church of God are all classified or all will fall under that evangelical banner. That's interesting, just in that assumption. Well, they have, you do a survey, you have to make some assumptions. And then when you go down and dig a little deeper into this idea, you talk about how committed people are to their faith, according to this article, plays a big role in whether they are for or against legal abortion. Most of those who said religion is very important in forming their views about abortion oppose it, 73%. People who attend religious services once a week are also against legal abortion at 53%, not strongly against it, apparently. And those who pray daily against it, 71%, and read the Bible at least once a week at 52%. And then it goes down the list of those who self-identify in a denomination or a belief system as to their approval of abortion. Unitarian Universalists at 90%. atheists at 87%, and then it goes on down the line. Jewish at 83%. That surprised me. And then the United Methodist Church sits right at the same level as all U.S. adults, right on the fence, Carl. We're right there on the fence.
Well, we're pretty middle of the road kind of people, aren't we?
But Muslim at 55%, Catholic 48%, Mormon 27%. So you move on down the line in different denominations. So again, the Pew Research Council has been surveying religious ideas. This is where the idea of nuns came up. NONES is from their research, that people who had no religious affiliation or strong affiliation. And so, Carl, what do you make of this in terms of our own congregations, and are we is that we are we may be open or teaching one way or another, or we avoid it completely, or?
Well, this is one of those topics that people are going to feel very strongly one way or the other. I talk about the United Methodists, we're just sort of middle of the road, middle ground. But you talk to individuals, and they're not middle of the road on abortion. They either think it's okay or they think it's not okay. Not too much gray area there. I'm fascinated by these statistics on the people who attend church regularly or read their scripture regularly, or who say that their faith is very important to their views on abortion, and they are opposed to it. They're more opposed to it than all these other people listed on here. And so it comes down to how people identify themselves. Okay, you're given a survey. They say, so what religion are you? Well, I'm a Christian. Okay, what denomination? I belong to the Presbyterian Church USA or whatever. Okay, now, there's a lot of people who identify as Christians but aren't necessarily committed to living as Christians.
Sure.
Okay, you get your name on the roll book in the church means you get your name on the roll book upstairs, and then you're good to go. But these people it looks like the people who are really committed to growing in their faith are being transformed into people who see this act of abortion as not being in line with God's will.
Now, what you bring up here is parallel to what Bob was talking about here, in that this survey doesn't account for what do you think should be legal versus what do you believe is a sin.
Right.
See,
right.
It's two very different questions, right, Bob?
It's very different questions. It's almost, to me, a very superficial way they approached this. They approached it at way, way, way top line. And I think what you're talking about, Carl, is the people who have a deep relationship with Christ and a growing relationship with Christ. One of the things the Holy Spirit is supposed to do is to open our eyes and take away the veil so that you can see what the truth of the matter is. And I think that it would be interesting to dig a little bit more, regardless of the denomination, but where you stand with your relationship with Christ. That would have been a very more relevant way of approaching this topic, rather than just a general lumping of people into one group or another. In science, we talk about the lumpers and the splitters. Well, this is a case where you need to split to find out what you're really looking at. It's much too superficial, much too trivial to take it at that level, yet it still does tell us some things. I was very surprised to see the number of, or the percentage of Jewish people who thought abortion was good.
Yeah, it was legal.
Should be legal. I'm sorry. See, there I go.
Yeah, there you go. But it's the other side of that again. Well, and Judaism, I think it's probably a good example of that. Certainly, you would look at perhaps Muslims and even Mormonism somewhat. It's more tribal in nature, and that it's as for me and my family, that would be. It'd be a familial, it'd be a thing they're raised in and they stay in because this is the essence of who they are ethnically. So that becomes I think that's a different understanding than one who chooses their denomination or chooses their faith, their Christianity, or chooses Buddhism, for example. So it's interesting survey in that, but like you said, I went to the Pew Research side of it and looking just of it, and they're just asking about the legality. They're really not asking the moral question. I know a lot of committed Christians who are kind of ambivalent about whether or not it's legal. The only thing that's important to them is the moral position. You know, that if it's sinful, then I want to kind of protect myself from that sin and also teach others to be protected from that sin.
And right now, if a woman makes the choice to have an abortion, she can do it legally. And she doesn't have to go and do it illegally, put her own life in danger and all of that. But it comes down to her decision. What is she going to do? And we in the church have to teach them the right thing to do.
And
help
also,
them to make the right choice.
Right, give them the information. Right.
Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church. Reverend Carl Zarowski, who is a pastor at St. Peter's United Methodist Church, and Dr. Bob Wilson, the author of Nullifying God. And we want to talk a little bit about our last one, and sometimes we call this the Sign of the Apocalypse story. But this one is interesting in that we knew about it ahead of time, but frankly, there wasn't a lot of media coverage after the event, only because nothing happened, really. I mean, media's not going to cover a whole lot of things unless things happen, but this is certainly controversial going into it. Pennsylvania Church, when some of us will put that in air quotes, holds AR-15 blessing ceremony. This is the article from the Tribune Y Media, and again, where is this? Yeah, and in Dreher Township, Pennsylvania. Says a church ceremony inviting hundreds of people to bring their high-powered rifles sparked controversy and protests Wednesday morning in Pennsylvania. The ceremony at Sanctuary Church near Newfoundland started at 10 a.m. and wrapped up shortly before noon. Followers of the offshoot of the Unification Church came with their AR-15s, which they believe are the rod of iron mentioned in the Bible. Here's where we get to some of the details and why I said church in air quotes. Reverend Sean Moon, I think it's actually his name is Sean Yen Moon, the son of the late Sun Myung Moon, led the blessing of couples inside the church. Several hundred worshipers wore crowns, some made of bullets, and held their firearms throughout the ceremony. Okay, this is...
And note, Ben, it's called the World Peace and Unification Sanctuary.
Right. He had a falling out with his father's original church. He called them a cult, by the way. I found that in another article. But in here, he's saying that he believes, and I think the part to really look at here is that he believes that the rod of iron mentioned in the Bible is a weapon, is a firearm. And the whole idea of going through this process is to affirm that belief, essentially.
It'd be an interesting case where if a member of this church, on the basis of the fact that someone was doing something wrong, shot them with the rod of iron, could they then use that for a defense in court? That may be a little facetious, but at the same time, what in the world are we doing here? What are they doing here? You could argue the AR-15, but the point is that this is, I don't like where the direction that's heading. Part of it is I'm very sensitive to this. When we lived in San Francisco, it was in the late 70s, and when I used to walk downtown from where I worked at the Army base, there was a woman, an African-American woman, standing on a corner, and she was collecting money for a trip to South America for the Jim Jones Church.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, that was a cult. Here was this woman. She seemed sweet. She was an elderly woman doing this. And then when I read what happened down there, it's like I contributed to her. Mm-hmm. And so I came back, and it's like I have very, very strong feelings against cults. Here we're dealing with a situation where a cult, clearly a cult, is blessing the rod of iron, which they have designated as the AR-15, or I would assume another type weapon like that. And I'm thinking, what in the world are the possibilities that we're dealing here? What could be the possible fallout? What would be the justification and rationalization for using any one of these weapons wherever they thought it was supposed to be used?
Yeah, this one's a hard one to wrap your head around exactly what was their meaning, what's their theology here. That comes about. It also may be a little simpler. The Reverend Sean Moon's brother, Justin Moon, owns Carr Arms, a gun maker in Pike County. That maybe maybe a little bit more. Maybe they got discounts. But the guns were unloaded and zip tied. But besides that, they had this weird ceremony, and I can't think of another really word for it.
Well, there's a fellow here named Jonathan Franco. And he was born into the Unification Church, and now he follows the Sanctuary Church. And he says, if you don't have a rod of iron, then unfortunately you can come into a situation where your life can come to an end. Who else is there to blame if you yourself didn't take the responsibility to preserve your own life? Now, doesn't that go exactly against the teachings of Christ? You know, that we should be willing to lay our life down for the sake of someone else. And what they're teaching is it's all about preserving your own life.
Well, that goes back to the current trend, which is increasing, and that is that your independence from God, yourself. That's the most important thing. And this is just another way of looking at it. You know, you preserve self. Well, that is, unfortunately, is not going to do you any good when you stand before God in judgment. You know, self doesn't make any difference. You know, but giving yourself over to Him, and if necessary, laying down your life, that's what we're talking about. So theologically, I'm not a theologian. Okay, guys, I'm a biologist. You know that. But I look at this and I'm thinking there is something so dramatically opposed to anything having to do with the Lord God we know that it's just, I don't know how to wrap my head around it. You used that phrase before, Ben.
Right. It is. It's difficult. There's also something because we don't have an extended dissertation on this, really just a news article. So it says that they wore crowns, and that he prayed, Reverend Sean Moon prayed that they would stand as kings and queens with their crown and rod of iron. So I don't, we have to understand their idea of what the crown was, or how they would all wear crowns. Now we do understand the blessings of couples. That's a long tradition of his father, Unification Church, and even though he broke away from it, they still obviously uphold a lot of those traditions. But it's just so unusual and so hard to even imagine the theology that comes out of this that we can make sense of.
The question, and more formally, would be: do they have a coherent theology? And if so, what is it? What is it allows them to do this? Is it an anything goes at the moment, or is there something rooted more deeply here? Protecting yourself, I mean, their justification for it, at first glance, it almost makes sense. But the question, a larger question is, what are you going to, if you're walking down to the grocery store, are you going to wear your AR-15 over your shoulder to protect your life? And that's not trivial. It's weird. There's no other way to put it.
We live in different times, don't we? The quote they're taking from Revelation 2:27 in the King James Version: "He shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter; they shall be broken to shivers. Even I am received of my Father." So, I mean, that's what I could glean from what they must be taking here from this. So, But Carl, as we know and we warn against all the time, is that we can bumper sticker the Bible a lot. I mean, we can pull out a lot of phrases and make them be our theology without having a coherent sense.
That's right, because you take any part of the Scripture. We've talked about this on here before. We need to talk about the context. Mm-hmm. You know, who was it written to? When was it written? What was the purpose behind it? What was the theology of it? And this is bumper sticker theology, if I've ever heard it, and very frightening bumper sticker theology. You know, I have to wonder: is this idea about preserving yourself, is this so that all of the members of this community are going to be preserved as a community for something that they have planned or some world that's going to come in the future? I don't know. I tried to do a little bit of research on the theology of this church and exactly what it is they believe. I researched it. I could not make heads or tails. I could not find anything like a statement of faith that really helped me understand, except for the fact that Reverend Moon was supposedly Jesus, and that Jesus came back born as him, I think, in 1920, but he has since died. And so I'm not really sure where they are now. I think that this fellow here, his son, sees himself as the Messiah now. And apparently there's a lot of people with AR-15s who also see him as the Messiah.
I wish I had one quote that I got from one of the defense lawyer books I had. But it comes down to this, that once somebody crosses over a bridge in faith, then everything on the other side of that bridge makes sense. Once they've committed to it, then they're fully into it, and whatever you come to show them is not, that you're way off base. They don't accept it because they have accepted the fact that what is in this particular case.
Dr. Bob Wilson joining us along with Reverend Carl Zarowski, and I'm Ben Ball. Thanks for joining us on Faith Matters on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.